If you're looking for a middleweight naked bike for up to 8,000 euros, you could go for an established option like the Kawasaki Z650S, or you could go for this, the CFMOTO 675 NK. I've ridden both, and in this video you'll find out how they compare. And with that, welcome to 1000 PS TV. As you can see, there's only one bike here in this comparison for one simple reason. Yesterday I was at the launch of the new Kawasaki Z650S and rode it there. Now I'm back at our accommodation in Barcelona, and this was waiting for me here, a CFMOTO 675 NK. Both bikes sit in the same price range, and even on paper their performance figures aren't all that far apart. So I thought, well, I've ridden both, let's take a look at how they compare. And I'd say we go through it chapter by chapter, nice and tidy, starting with point 1, the design. Of course, this is completely subjective, but you can still see some clear lines. With the Kawasaki Z650S, we get the Tsugomi design for 2026, and in the new S variant, it's clearly inspired by the popular Z900, and the tail has also been revised, now with a rear light inspired by the Z500. Even so, the Z650 is still instantly recognizable as a Kawasaki. There are new color schemes that step a bit outside the norm. Not just Kawasaki green, which I personally like a lot, but you can see they're taking a new step, a new direction at Kawasaki with this modern Tsugomi design. As I said, the Z500 and Z900 share the same front mask, and the result is that when one of these bikes comes towards you, you don't really know which Kawasaki is riding at you. Great for owners of the smaller models, not so great for Z900 owners, but it does create a very clear new design language for Kawasaki's naked bikes. CFMOTO is also following its own line, but you can still recognize a family face. Here on the 675 NK, everything looks very futuristic, but above all, very motorsport inspired. The biggest clue is the front brake discs with brake cooling. Whether it actually brings any technical benefit, I can't tell you, but it looks mighty, and the whole bike follows that same theme. It looks very chunky and masculine. The idea is clearly to show that this is a properly sporty naked bike. Compared to it, the Z650S looks more delicate, more agile. This one feels like a proper bruiser, a real loutish bike. But I think it looks good, it looks sporty. Of course, that's completely subjective, so write in the comments which bike you prefer the look of. Let's move on to chapter 2, the engine. This isn't about subjective impressions, this is about facts. Let's begin. With the Kawasaki we get the well-known parallel twin, 649 cubic centimeters, 68 PS and 64 Newton meters of torque. It's a familiar engine. Kawasaki has been using this unit for decades and it simply works. And I think that describes this engine best. It works. The Kawasaki parallel twin gives me enough grunt from low down so I can drive nicely out of tight hairpins even if I'm not in exactly the right gear. It just works. But what the engine lacks is emotion. You can now get a quick shifter as an option, so that adds a bit of sportiness. But apart from that, the engine's power curve is very linear and it just keeps spinning, though you don't really need to rev it out because the higher you rev it, the less happens. So the Kawasaki engine is a loyal engine. It won't overwhelm anyone, it won't surprise anyone, but it doesn't exactly set my heart racing. With CFMOTO we get the exact opposite. Here there's one more cylinder, a triple, just under 675 cubic centimeters, 90 PS and 68 Newton meters of torque. So in terms of power we get just over 20 PS more, but only 4 Newton meters more. And that reflects the engine character very well. It wants revs. Parallel triples always try to bridge the gap between a twin and an inline 4, so you get a bit of punch low down, but above all that rev-happy nature, and this engine definitely has it. The engine sounds absolutely wild, it accelerates very hard, and it's genuinely great fun, especially when it makes a sound that leaves you thinking, how on earth is that legal? And on top of that, we get a quick shifter as standard, which at the right revs gives you such a bang that you start wondering what exactly is going on here. Not everything about this engine is positive though, because compared to the Kawasaki, there is one major downside, and that's the throttle response. CFMOTO still needs to work on that. Especially at low revs and in tight hairpins, when you open the throttle, you get a jolt through the whole bike, and that's really unpleasant. We've seen that across quite a lot of the CFMOTO range, so the Chinese manufacturer still needs to do a bit of fine-tuning there. One thing worth mentioning on both engines though is that they're old school. That means no ride-by-wire, just a classic cable throttle. So there are no riding modes either. You simply get on, start the engine and ride off. What both bikes do have, thankfully, is traction control, adjustable and fully switchable off. So there are modern safety features there to stop you flying off. So to wrap up the engines, I'd say this: if you want emotion, if you want something dirty and crackly, then this engine is pure emotion and huge fun. If you want an accessible engine that simply works, doesn't overwhelm you and will still make you happy from day one right to the end of your riding days, then the Kawasaki is the one to go for. That's it for the engines, so I'd say let's move on to the handling. A lot goes into that, especially feeling comfortable on the bike. And I do right now because, as you can see, I'm proudly wearing Vanucci kit today, the same stuff I was wearing on the Kawasaki. There's a very simple reason for that. These are bikes that are also meant to appeal to beginners, and above all, they're attractively priced. And that took me a bit back in time, back to when I first started riding motorcycles, because what did I do then? I went to Lewis and put together an outfit. And to relive that time a little, I did the same thing now. I picked up a smart leather jacket from Vanucci, a comfortable pair of motorcycle jeans, matching motorcycle boots with a sole developed by Michelin, which I think is pretty cool, and of course the matching gloves as well. And on top of that, a Michelin helmet with a sun visor, but a clear outer visor, because the shooting days here in Barcelona can get long, and I don't want to be riding around at night with a tinted visor just to stay on the safe side. So good gear from Lewis, attractively priced, and a good match for these bikes. If you want to know more, I've put the links for you in the description. But now back to the handling. As you can see, I've taken a seat here on the CFMOTO with a seat height of 810 millimeters. And as I already mentioned in the design section, this bike feels big. The spec sheet doesn't really underline that, because both bikes, the Kawasaki and the CFMOTO, weigh around 190 kilograms, so they're very similar there. But just looking in front of me, I can see a wide tank, the body panels stick out quite far, and the handlebar is mounted very wide and high. So right away I get the sense that I'm sitting on a substantial motorcycle. A full-size motorcycle. And once I head out onto country roads, that feeling gets even stronger, because for the sake of the look, we get a 180 rear tire. That means on the road I have a very stable motorcycle. A bike that really holds its line well, but also wants a clear command as to where it's meant to go. We get quality suspension components, an adjustable upside-down fork at the front, and an adjustable rear shock as well. And that gives the CFMOTO, despite being in the middleweight class, the feel of a bigger motorcycle. One that sits solidly on the road, holds a long radius cleanly, but in tight roads and tight hairpins needs a bit more input to get turned in. The opposite of that is the Kawasaki. There we get more budget suspension components, a conventional fork that isn't adjustable, and a rear shock with preload adjustment only. It also has just a 160 rear tire. As a result, the Kawasaki doesn't just look more delicate, it feels that way when riding as well. Despite the updates on the new Z650S, where the handlebar has been moved further up and the seat has gained more padding to a seat height of 805 millimeters, the Z650S remains a very playful, agile and nimble motorcycle. And that's where its strengths really shine, when you're riding on a tight country road. It can just dart through corners and it drops into the radius with playful ease. But when the pace picks up, the corners get longer and maybe there are a few bumps thrown in, then you notice a bit of restlessness in the Kawasaki that simply isn't there in the CFMOTO. So the Kawasaki feels more at home on tight roads, narrow roads, and also in town, where its slim dimensions really work in its favor. The CFMOTO, on the other hand, comes alive when things get more serious, when the pace rises, or maybe even if you take it onto a track, because this bike unquestionably has the power for it. As for the brakes, just to touch on them briefly, there really isn't much between the two. Similar weight, and above all, both bikes are also meant to appeal to beginners and returning riders, so the setup isn't especially aggressive. That means both bikes have good braking performance. Nothing exceptional, but also nothing to be ashamed of. And something you definitely don't need to be ashamed of is the equipment, which I also want to bring into the handling section here, because for naked bikes in the middleweight class under 8,000 euros, both come with adjustable brake and clutch levers. I want to highlight that because even bikes that cost more than this CFMOTO or the Kawasaki sometimes don't have that, simply because manufacturers want to save money. Here, both of them get it, and that deserves credit. So to sum up point 3, handling, you could say this. The CFMOTO is the stable one, the one that really feels like a big naked bike, while the Kawasaki is the agile, nimble and fun machine, and one that can truly delight beginners. I've already touched briefly on the equipment, but let's still move on to point 4, equipment and finish. And to be honest, there isn't much between the two here either. The finish is clean on both bikes. Of course, they also need to show a certain level of durability. These are motorcycles that may well get treated a bit roughly because beginners will ride them and they might even have the odd crash. But in terms of pure finish, there's nothing to complain about. And actually, looking at this example right now, I can see that the brake lever has already been shortened, let's say, but it doesn't take anything away from the bike. What the CFMOTO has and the Kawasaki doesn't is a steering damper, which I think fits well with my riding impression that this is the stable motorcycle, the one where you want that calmness at the bars in fast bends. Other than that, both bikes get a TFT display with connectivity. I've mounted an SP Connect here anyway, so I can follow routes with Kalimoto. Apart from that, as I already mentioned, both have traction control, both have ABS and both have LED lighting. So really there's not much in it. In the end, it'll come down purely to taste, which operating concept you prefer. The CFMOTO uses a control pad here, while on the Kawasaki some things are still a bit old school and have to be done via the display. But in the end, those are nuances. So in terms of equipment and finish, they're pretty much level. Which brings me to the conclusion. Both are A2 compatible naked bikes for under 8,000 euros. Both are aimed at beginners and returning riders, while still offering genuine riding pleasure. The real difference comes down to the engine and the design. If you buy the CFMOTO, you're buying a wild, raw, naked bike that's properly cheeky, has a murderous soundtrack, and a quick shifter that genuinely makes you wonder whether this thing is still road legal or not. It's simply a machine of pure emotion and pure design. If you go for the Z650S, you're buying the safe choice. The engine works, it's proven. The chassis works, it's proven. And sometimes I think a naked bike doesn't need to be anything more than a bike that simply works. So in the end, the choice is really yours at home. What kind of person are you? Are you someone who wants the rough one, the emotional one? Or are you someone who says, I know what I'm buying, it's sensible and it's going to give me real enjoyment for years? I'd be really interested in your choice. What do you say? Which bike would you pick? The Kawasaki Z650S or the CFMOTO 675 NK? I'd love to know, so write it in the comments. And of course, stay with us and subscribe to the channel, because here from Spain we're bringing you a whole series of exciting videos. So stay tuned, subscribe, and we'll see each other again in the next video. Thanks for watching, see you soon, bye and take care.